McCartney is an interesting personality. You know, as a fashion designer, she has made a really, really successful career with an absolute dedication to work. She has worked very, very hard over the years and has a very successful line as a product of that.
In the 90s, for many people, Stella McCartney was this kind of young upstart, and now, obviously, 21 years on, she's become part of the establishment. But really what it's about is connecting with youth, connecting with that kind of new generation of consumers.
She very much positions herself at the centre of the brand, and she is very associated with being British, because of her father and his success.
She is a working mother. She is a businesswoman. She is kind of a modern feminist who also has all of these ethical principles.
Stella McCartney was born in September 1971 in London. Her father is Paul McCartney, and her mother was Linda McCartney. When she was born, it was in the wake of the Beatles splitting up. So her father and mother had a new band that they were working on called Wings. So when she was very, very young, she travelled the world with them. When that band broke up, they moved to Sussex to an organic farm. And actually, that period was very normal, and that was something that her parents really wanted.
At the same time, she also went to local state schools rather than private education. Her parents were very insistent that Stella and her brothers and sisters all had a normal upbringing rather than the kind of rarefied atmosphere of the rich and famous. Stella McCartney always says that she became interested in designing clothes in her early teenage years. She was aware of her appearance, and obviously she grew up with her mother and father, and her mother was fashionable. She bought clothes from designers like Karl Lagerfeld at Chloe, and she was very aware of her appearance. The first thing that she remembers designing was a jacket when she was aged 13, but by the age of 16, she was already making her first steps into the fashion industry. At that age, she went to assist on Christian Lacroix's first haute couture collection under his own name, which is in 1987. And there are recollections from journalists at the time that Stella was the person that was going and putting the programmes on the seats for the different editors and helping arrange the flowers at the side of the catwalk for that debut. Before beginning her studies at Central St Martin's, Stella McCartney went to work for her father's Savile Row tailor, Edward Sexton. She's made a great deal about that period in her life because a lot of Stella's clothes are based on English tailoring, on English men's tailoring, and translating that into a women's wardrobe. She actually called Sexton in to help work on her debut collection under her own name in the late 90s. Stella, first of all, studied at Ravensbourne College. She studied her foundation course at Ravensbourne and then went on to study the BA in fashion at Central St Martin's. For her graduation collection, I think it's fair to say that she pulled some strings in terms of her family connections.
Her graduate collection at Central St Martin's went down, went on the front pages of every newspaper. She rang her friends to model, and instead of them being sort of slightly attractive friends that you'd go to a bar with or knew through another friend, it was Kate Moss, Yasmin Le Bon, Naomi Campbell. So this was really unheard of for a graduate degree show.
I think Stella McCartney would have garnered press attention no matter what she did. She is Paul McCartney's daughter, and that will always be newsworthy. Her graduation collection was always going to get more coverage than anyone else's would in comparable circumstances. What Stella did very cleverly was realise that, acknowledge that, and use it to her best advantage, rather than letting the exposure that came with her name affect her. Really, what she decided to do was to use it in order to showcase her work. That garnered quite specific reactions from her classmates who saw Stella as somebody who was privileged and someone who was certainly using kind of her family relations to get on in the industry. But it did seem to work because Stella's graduate collection was picked up by the boutique Tokyo in London, and also major stockists like Browns, Joseph, Bergdorf Goodman and Neiman Marcus in the US. So really that graduate collection launched her on a fashion career. Really, when Stella started, her first collection, the graduation collection and the first collection she presented in London, which she did very, very low-key. She presented them at a friend's flat. But really what they revolved around was kind of Savile Row tailoring, really classically tailored men's suits, but remade for women with new proportions, and also slip dresses, which were inspired by vintage underwear.
Her mother had been a collector of vintage and antique slip dresses, so that was something that she explored in her very early collections.
Stella McCartney surprised the fashion world when she was appointed creative director at Chloe in Paris, a position once held by Karl Lagerfeld.
She had opened a small boutique in London just after her graduation, and the first couple of years she got lots and lots of buzz around her, lots of famous people wearing her clothes. And so the story goes that the head of Chloe had come to check her out, and she'd been in the store and he'd been so impressed with the way in which she spoke about not only her designs but the way in which to market them and how to get kind of conversation around them, that he appointed her as the head.
I think it's difficult for us to envisage now because Chloe is, incredibly successful. Chloe is very prominent, but at that point in time it had gone off the boil. People weren't buying Chloe clothes, people weren't shooting them, people weren't so interested in the house. And really what the appointment of Stella McCartney was to generate more interest in Chloe, to generate press for Chloe, as well as the knock-on effect of stimulating the sales.
So off she went to Chloe, and she took with her the now celebrated designer Phoebe Philo, who was at the time her assistant, which is very interesting to see their sort of shared languages.
When Stella went there, she did kickstart sales. That sense of femininity that she was always espousing as essential to her work really tapped in with the kind of glory days of Chloe in the 70s under Lagerfeld, when it was very much about a kind of floaty idea of femininity, very much about the clothes that, coincidentally, Stella McCartney's mother had been wearing. So for Stella McCartney to go in on the back of a 70s revival that was still happening at the end of the 90s, to talk about Chloe's identity in the 70s, it's really about kind of going back to the heart of what Chloe was about and then kind of harnessing that to current trends in fashion. And what Stella offered was this kind of soft femininity mixed with masculine tailoring, which was very much part of a current fashion conversation going on across the world at that point in time. She did have a great deal of success at Chloe. She did bring it to a new prominence. She did sell more clothes. She certainly made it feel more contemporary and gave it more of an identity. And when you look at Chloe today, it's actually trading off that kind of 70s revival identity that Stella McCartney re-established for it.
I think the novelty prints, slogans, the tropical fruits, pineapples, the horsey motifs, they were really popular, and they did exactly what the head of Chloe had intended. They engaged a much younger audience, and actually their kind of pickup was phenomenal. There was a great success.
In 2001, Stella McCartney launched her own label.
I think it was a very big statement for Stella McCartney to branch away from Chloe and to launch her own label. Which was then launched with the Gucci group, led by Tom Ford and Domenico De Sol. Really, in 2001, when she was establishing her own label, what she had to ask was what was the identity of Stella McCartney. Fashion had moved on enormously since 1997, which was the last time she'd shown under her own label, when it was kind of a small indie operation based in London. This was a fashion show with the backing of an enormous conglomerate, a conglomerate that was equally snapping up other design labels. It had bought Balenciaga, it had also bought Alexander McQueen. So Not only was there a lot of pressure on Stella independently, there was also rivals. There were also people that she was being compared to. And when you look at that collection, really, she hadn't quite figured out what her identity was.
Actually, her first collection wasn't very well received. And then subsequently, they have been, over the years. So she has a very kind of laid-back sort of aesthetic, tailoring, slip dresses, silk. It's always staying to this kind of specific palette and very wearable.
I've actually grown to really admire the ethics of Stella McCartney's work because it's something that she's steadfastly stuck to, and it's incredibly difficult to stick to that. She's not only said no to fur or no to exotic skins, which are quite standard, she said no to leather completely. She said no to any animal products, and she describes her products as vegan.
She's always very dedicated to animal rights, so everything is very conscious of that. So all the bags are not made of leather, neither are the shoes.
It's a very kind of a brave stance for Stella to take, and very difficult. It's also something that's paid off. The interesting thing, I feel, is that even though Stella uses, fake leather, Stella uses fabric in place of these normal textiles. She uses fake fur instead of real fur. She tries to find innovative solutions to demands for certain types of luxury products. She's actually been able to build a business out of that. She's built an incredibly healthy accessories business based entirely on animal-free product. And it's something that's incredibly impressive. Sometimes she does use fake fur that looks like fur. For instance, in her collections at Chloe, she used a lot of kind of naturally textured fake fur. She's done that in her own collections as well.
Fur-free fur is what it says on the label. It has no natural pelt in the fur. It looks like fur, it's not actually fur. But she wanted to be very clear that it was not real fur. So the fur-free label kind of sits somewhere explicit on the calf or, other places.
With Stella McCartney, there's always been an interest in contemporary art in what she does. She's collaborated with a number of different artists to put their graphics onto her clothes. There's been Jeff Koons, there was Peter Blake.
When she collaborated in 2002 with Gary Hume, the profits went to Afghan women's rights charity. For her marriage to Alistair Willis, she chose to wear her mother's wedding dress, which she had worn to marry her father in the late 60s, and she updated it for the occasion. It was in Scotland that they were wed, and they're still happily married, and they have 4 children. The Stella perfume, to look at the bottle, actually in your mind, it does evoke the brand, so I think it is a good branding exercise. The perfume is very light and it sells very, very well. It's very successful. So her profile is ever increasing, and she, as a quite young designer with her own label, is designing for Annie Lennox's tour, Madonna's tour.
She designed costumes for Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. And with a lot of designers, you would debate if that is about raising their profile. I think with Stella McCartney, there's this idea that she doesn't really need to raise her profile. Stella McCartney is almost in a unique position in that she already has a great deal of fame, that her name outside of her work as a fashion designer is already recognised. So really what she can do is devote herself to projects like that if she wants to do them.
Adidas and Stella McCartney's collaboration is a real success. She's the first designer to have embarked in this kind of sportswear collaboration. What she was saying is that women want to exercise, but they also want to look stylish, and that's what she was going to provide, and that was what was missing in the market.
Really, it's about blurring this line between sports performance wear and fashion. What that did do, I think, is bring Stella McCartney's name to an even wider public, but in that wider public were now able to buy into her clothes, buy into her ethos. It was something that got pushed further in 2005 when Stella McCartney was chosen as the second designer after Karl Lagerfeld to create a range for H&M.
Stella McCartney for H&M was around 40 pieces. She created the line by looking at her previous designs and kind of rehashing, reworking her favourite 40.
What that was about was, I guess, a really good exercise for Stella McCartney in terms of determining what her signature items was, what was the essence of Stella McCartney as a brand, and how could you translate that into the mass market. And when you look at the Stella McCartney H&M collection, I personally think it's one of the best collections she's ever done, because it's the kind of core of what she's about, the sort of tailoring, a softness, a femininity, a love of embellishment, innovative details, a touch of lingerie. It's all there in this incredibly tight capsule collection. In 2007, Stella McCartney decided to expand into skincare. It's interesting because that's obviously something that's generally the preserve of much bigger players. So for Stella to be expanding into skincare so early on was quite a statement. The idea of her skincare range, which she called Care, was for everything to be organic, for no endangered plants to be used, for everything to be incredibly holistic, incredibly nature-focused. Ultimately, what that did result in the skincare range was that it was very expensive, and as a result, it was relatively short-lived. Stella was only selling Care for 4 years. It was folded in 2011. I think with the kind of identity that Stella established so early for herself based in vintage underwear, it was quite natural for her to expand into lingerie, and this has been one of the most sort of successful facets of her business. And again, I think it kind of links with what she does at Adidas, which is that it's about a woman knowing what other women want to wear, a woman knowing how other women want lingerie to feel on her body. Stella McCartney's mother, Linda, died of breast cancer, and Stella McCartney's created a mastectomy bra. There's really this kind of engagement with women. I would say alongside the kind of ethical stance, which is something that's incredibly personal to Stella, the idea of a modern kind of working mother's life is really something that she wants to build into her clothes. So really it's about, I guess, expanding into these ideas of lifestyle, this, you know, pushing yourself into different categories. And that's followed by the fact that later on this year in 2016, she's going to be launching menswear. And that's an enormous expansion for someone that's been focused on women's wear for the entirety of her 21-year career. Further to that lifestyle proposition, Stella McCartney launched kids wear, and that's been an incredibly successful element of the business.
Stella McCartney was appointed by Adidas as Team GB's creative director for the 2012 and 2016 Olympics.
The interesting thing with what Stella's done for the Olympics is she's the only designer who's designed them to be worn throughout the range of activities. And out of all Olympic designers, she's the first person to do that, the first person to actually apply her skills to clothes that will be worn in one of the most grueling sports contests in the world. Stella McCartney was awarded an honorary fellowship from the University of the Arts, London, but she also established a scholarship at Central St Martin's.
A scholarship that supports designers that will work within the parameters of kind of ethical fashion is really, really fantastic. You know, you speak to young designers today, and there is a growing interest in sustainability and looking at environmental issues and incorporating it into their work, ethical trading and production. So I think for her to be supporting that financially is really fantastic.
In 2013, Stella McCartney was awarded an OBE for services to fashion.
I think the OBE for services to industry definitely deserved, I mean, in the sense that she's had a really, really successful career. In 2014, she revisited the collaboration with Gary Hume and reworked it. The whole collection was, interestingly, about her stepsister's acceptance of teenage years. And so she reworked the Gary Humes into that, and it was well received. So in the Green Carpet collection, which is Olivia fur initiative. Stella McCartney used all the scraps and waste fabric that she had and created these really amazing gowns. I think, you know, lending her name to initiatives such as that is really fantastic. She hosted a really gorgeous party where the models wore the clothes and they were, you know, you invited a life drawer and, you know, lots of press coverage was got. And these scraps are burnt, usually, so it's really fantastic to see someone of her kind of stature engaging in that. I think using younger models or kind of personalities within her fragrance advertising campaign, the new fragrance Pop, so Lourdes, Madonna's daughter, and Grimes, the musician, for example, does definitely engage a different audience. I mean, even the kind of discussions online and the platforms that they were on, it definitely reaches somewhere different.
The really interesting thing looking at Stella McCartney's label is it's very much a representation of herself. It's about her, perhaps more than any other designer, it's about her interests, it's about her motivations.
Stella McCartney's legacy, I personally think it's still kind of being developed. I think her time at Chloe will be remembered, and then her line itself. I do wonder what will be the standout moments. I think maybe it's almost a little too early to tell, but I think she will definitely be known as clothes that women enjoyed wearing.